Two men that had the exact type of birth as Jesus. Number 1. Moses. The birth of Jesus was a period of mass execution. The Innocents Massacre is an incident in the nativity narrative of the Gospel of Matthew. King Herod was concerned about the newborn king and wanted to destroy him. This King Herod was actually Herod the Great, who was given the title of king by the Roman Senate due to the influence that Mark Antony held. Herod was a ruthless and cunning man who would not tolerate anyone, not even members of his own family, interfering with his rule or preventing him from achieving the nefarious goals he had set for himself. He was cold-blooded. He exterminated his wife and her 2 brothers because he suspected them of treason. At least 9 of his marriages were conducted to satisfy his lusts and bolster his political connections. It should not surprise that Herod attempted to execute Jesus because he alone wanted to bear the title King of the Jews. Then Herod, when he realized that he had been tricked by the Magi, was extremely angry, and he sent soldiers to put to death all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that area who were 2 years old and under, according to the date which he had learned from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted, because they were no more. Matthew chapter 2, verses 16 through 18, Amplified Bible. Jesus was saved through divine intervention and had to escape. Moses was born in very similar circumstances. Moses' mother, Jochebed, was a Hebrew woman living in slavery in Egypt before the Exodus. She was the daughter of a Levite, and she married Amram, another Levite. 400 years had passed since the Jews had first settled in Egypt. Joseph had spared the country from starvation, but the pharaohs who ruled Egypt gradually forgot about him. As a newborn, Moses first opened his eyes to a cruel and unforgiving world. He was born in a nation of might, yet he was of a foreign and oppressed during a time when all infants, such as himself, were under a royal death sentence. Moses' parents acted out of both natural parental instinct and faith in God. For 3 months, they hid him in some private apartment of their own house, even though doing so possibly put their lives in danger had he been found. When Moses was born, the Israelites were experiencing a lot of difficulty in Egypt. Midwives were ordered to end the lives of all newborn male Hebrew children by the king's command. Only female children were allowed to live. Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 through 22. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Siphrah, beauty, and the other Puah, splendor, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live." But the midwives feared God with profound reverence and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded, but they let the boy babies live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and allowed the boy babies to live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth quickly, and their babies are born before the midwife can get to them." So God was good to the midwives, and the people of Israel multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God with profound reverence, he established families and households for them. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born to the Hebrews must be thrown into the Nile, but every daughter you shall keep alive." Pharaoh devised this plan to exert authority over the Israelite population, flourishing and expanding in numbers in the land of Egypt. There was disobedience to this heinous command in many quarters. To protect her son Moses from death, Jochebed, Moses' mother, hid him in a basket of bulrushes and set him afloat on the Nile River. Exodus chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, New King James Version. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And her sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. In a literal sense, Jochebed did exactly what Pharaoh said, put her son into the river. She did, however, carefully place him in a watertight basket. The word for papyrus basket is used only here and for Noah's Ark. In the same way that Noah's Ark represents Christ, so does Jochebed's. But more so, this was a great example of trusting the child's welfare and future to God alone. When Jochebed let go of the boat constructed of bulrushes, she gave up something precious, trusting that God would take care of it. And God had a mighty plan. Under the guidance of God, Pharaoh's daughter discovered baby Moses. Despite being taught to reject the Hebrews due to her culture and upbringing, the infant's cries touched her heart. Exodus chapter 2, verses 5 through 10, New King James Version. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, so that she may nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." God had this beautifully planned for the deliverance of both Moses and, subsequently, for the salvation of the people of Israel. He expertly steered Moses' parents, the flow of the Nile, and the affection of Pharaoh's daughter to accomplish his will. God arranged for Moses' mother to train him in his early years and be paid for through the clever initiative of Moses' family and the need for Pharaoh's daughter. Jochebed gave birth to Moses, the future giver of the law, and cleverly spared him from death as an infant. God can make your worst enemy your savior. It was a miracle that the daughter of Pharaoh chose to adopt Moses. God made her a submissive friend. This brings to mind a number of promises that God makes in the Bible to those who fear Him about how He will bring our enemies to their knees and serve them. Here's one such promise. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 7, Amplified Bible. When a man's ways please the Lord, He makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. In this way, Moses was a foreshadowing of Christ, who in his infancy was forced to abscond and was wonderfully preserved when many innocents were butchered. Number 2. Joash. Jezebel had a daughter named Athaliah. Athaliah, whose name means afflicted by God, was queen of Judah and the only female monarch to sit on David's throne in biblical history. Athaliah then married Jehoram, the eldest son of Jehoshaphat. Ahaziah, Athaliah's son, became king at 22 with the support of his wicked mother. He lived up to his father's reputation for evilness. Ahaziah only reigned over Judah for a year before he was assassinated. When Athaliah learned that her son Ahaziah had passed away, instead of lamenting the loss of her son, she decided to grab the chance to usurp the monarchy by executing Ahaziah's sons, who were also her grandsons. By doing so, she eliminated the entire royal family and was able to ascend the throne. Unbeknownst to Athaliah, one of her grandchildren escaped the massacre unscathed. 2 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal offspring. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram of Judah and half-sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and abducted him from among the king's sons who were to be killed, and hid him and his nurse in the bedroom. So they hid him from Athaliah, and he was not put to death. Joash was hidden with his nurse in the house of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah reigned over the land. How dreadful is the lust of reigning! It destroys all the beautiful aspects of life and transforms everyone, even parents, siblings, and children, into the most barbaric of savages, just like Herod. Jehosheba, the aunt of the sons about to be put to death, boldly entered the royal house and removed a young man named Joash, same as Jehoash, from the group of sons who were being put to death. This humble woman played a significant role in God's plan for the ages. Evil people like Athaliah will begin their work, but God can always raise a Jehosheba. In this approach, evil will inevitably fall. Joash grew up in the temple. Along the same lines as Samuel, he likely came up with discreet ways to assist the priests, doing whatever was possible without drawing undue attention to himself. God had promised David that his line would continue on forever, a promise known as ordaining a lamb for his anointed. And it seems like a big deal now that we have read about so many royal families going extinct one after the other. Here we have David's promised lamb almost extinguished, yet wonderfully preserved. Despite Ahaziah's poor behavior as king and his involvement in immoral alliances, he was still David's heir and the successor of his royal line. God recalled his promise to David, and he protected this one tiny child from the carnage ordered by Athaliah. Athaliah's savage spite nearly put an end to it. Even stranger was that this queen, who had been a king's daughter, wife, and mother, turned out to be so brutal towards the royal family into which she had been born. It's commonly believed that grandmothers are more fond of their grandchildren than they were of their children. Nevertheless, Ahaziah's mother is the willful assassin of Ahaziah's sons, and in their infancy too, when she was obliged above any other to nurse them and take care of them. Like Moses, Joash was a brand plucked out of the fire. Now were David's words made good to one of his seed, Psalms 27:5. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. This Joash, when he grew up, set his sights on repairing the house of the Lord, because it had served as a haven for him. Jezebel, Athaliah's mother, set the precedent for this behavior, and Athaliah followed in her footsteps. Athaliah's reign of terror had lasted for 6 years. We do not have specific account of her reign, yet there is no question that it was consistent with the beginning. When Jehu was working to eradicate the worship of Baal in Israel, she was working to establish it in Judah, as is shown in, because of their alliance with the family of Ahab, the court and kingdom of Judah had become corrupt. After Athaliah had reigned for 6 years, the high priest Jehoiada surrounded the temple with guards and crowned Joash, a little boy, in front of the people as the legitimate monarch. The people clapped their hands and exclaimed, "Long live the king," as the new monarch was being anointed during the ceremony. 2 Kings chapter 11, verses 13 through 16, New American Standard Bible. When Athaliah heard the noise of the guards and of the people, she came to the people at the house of the Lord. And she looked, and behold, the king was standing by the pillar according to the custom, with the captains and the trumpeters beside the king. And all the people of the land were joyful and were blowing trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her clothes and cried out, "Conspiracy! Conspiracy!" And Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of hundreds who were appointed over the army, and said to them, "Bring her out between the ranks, and whoever follows her, put to death with the sword." For the priest said, "She is not to be put to death at the house of the Lord." So they seized her, and when they brought her to the horses' entrance of the king's house, she was put to death there. Like Herod, Queen Athaliah is an extreme example of a leader motivated not by love, but by power, prestige, and position. It takes a little while to spot the difference. The worship of Baal spread throughout Israel during the reign of Ahab, and it also impacted Judah. The truth is that if God is for us, nobody can be against us. Joash's story is also similar to Jesus. His father, Joseph, has to protect him. The earthly father of Jesus was assigned to protect the infant Christ. The devil can't outsmart God. God can use the angels, the hosts of heaven, the weather, and even human beings to work out his agenda for our lives. This is why the Bible gave us examples like Joash and Jesus, who had people who rose to ensure that God's instruments were kept safe. His agenda was preserved as they risked so much to keep these vessels of the Lord safe from harm. If God's agenda is attacked, rest assured that He always knows how to provide a way out. Our Creator can never be stuck or stranded. Therefore, He will go to great lengths to raise those who will step in to care and hide us from the enemy's schemes. Isaiah chapter 54, verse 15. Behold, they shall surely gather together, but not by me. Whosoever shall gather together against thee shall fall for thy sake. One of the people that was protected this way is Joash. These stories are a shadow of Jesus. Jesus said the Old Testament is about him. Luke chapter 24, verse 27. Then, beginning with Moses and throughout all the writings of the prophets, he explained and interpreted for them the things referring to himself found in all the scriptures. There are many shadows and types of Christ in the Old Testament. Jesus is primarily revealed two ways in the Old Testament. To begin, there are several prophecies concerning him. The second way Christ is made known to us in the Old Testament through the types of shadows that can be found. Shadows is an appropriate term to refer to the types of Christ found in the Old Testament. This is because shadows give an impression of what something looks like without actually showing the whole form of the object. This is something that the Old Testament did with Christ. A shadow is evidence that something is casting it, or in the case of Christ, it is someone. In Colossians chapter 2:17, Jesus is the substance, and Hebrews 10:1, he is the reality. The New Testament identifies many shadows and types of Christ in the Old Testament. Jesus is compared to Jonah in Matthew 12:40. In John 3:14, Jesus is compared to the bronze serpent. Jesus is compared to the manna in John 6:32 and 33. Jesus is compared to Adam in Romans 5:14. According to the passage in 1 Corinthians 10:4, Jesus is compared to the rock that accompanied Israel when they were wandering in the wilderness. Jesus is compared to towns of refuge in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 18. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 20, the body of Jesus is compared to the veil in the temple. Certain people serve as shadows and types of Christ in the Old Testament. Joseph is a type and shadow of Jesus Christ. Solomon is a type and shadow of Christ. Certain practices serve as shadows and types of Christ in the Old Testament. The law required various offerings to atone for sins, and each one pointed forward to Jesus as the ultimate and most significant sacrifice to atone for sins. Christ is the fulfillment of circumcision because he assists us in pulling off our sinful flesh. According to Hebrews 4:1-9, the rest that people had on the Sabbath was a mirror of the genuine and greater rest found in Christ. This is because the Sabbath rested them from their labors. In the past, Moses brought 10 judgments on a single nation. However, in the future, Jesus will bring 21 judgments upon the earth. What exactly are all of these predictions and shadows supposed to mean? To direct individuals in the direction of Christ.